I think other guys, like I've heard stories of just other big leaguers that are different, where they're just like, they feel like they've made it to this threshold, so they should be treating accordingly. And so it's like,
They feel like they need to be respected on a certain level.
like a little bit more.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, like I get it. Like you don't want to cross boundaries, and like there are guys that like within the game, they've earned that respect. But at the end of the day, that like we had a huge argument. I think I texted you in the middle of the season about it, where it was like, I was asking about like the DeGroms and the Scherzers, and I was like, do you think those guys were born that way, or do you think like everybody has that capability? And that's what I like. We had a long conversation within our team, and I sat on the side where I was just like, what? Like, we're all on the same level. Like, why can't we? Why can't I be the next DeGrom or the next, big name that you like? Those guys were normal dudes at one point, like I'm sure like Shohei, he probably has been a superstar all the way through. Like Trout, like has been pretty good since he's been to the big leagues, but like those guys like have struggled at certain times. So it's like, I don't know.
Yeah, they're all still human at the end of the day, and like actually sharing a clubhouse with them, you probably get to see you get to see the human side of them. You also get to see their struggles. Like you get to see when like, Cabrera has a, week-long streak of like just not getting hit, or like you get to see that the actual struggles. Like obviously there are some huge genetic variables in place, and like some of those guys are just like, they've always been the best player on the field their entire careers. Like I don't know how you feel about yourself, like how you would compare yourself on that side of the journey, because like, you're not 6'8", you're not like you don't have Aaron Judge's like leverage, you're not Tyler Glasnow. Like I would assume you would say like you had to kind of work for it and figure it out yourself.
Well, I have, and that's why I almost side with my argument a little bit more, because it's like, I was a walk-on. I didn't start pitching until the year I got drafted. Like I played shortstop. If you would have looked at my journey, no one would have ever thought I'd be in the big leagues.
Right.
No one, like even my family. But it's like, I still found a way. So it's like, if I wasn't supposed to be in the big leagues and I found a way, what's stopping me from not being the 1% of the big leaguers?
Right.
Where it's like, if I'm not, okay, yeah, you made it to the big leagues, that's an outlier. And then it's like, you're not supposed to be the best of the best. And it's like, why not? I wasn't supposed to be in here in the first place. Why can't I be?
Right.
Like, because you go out there and you show glimpses. Like, there's times where I go out there and I absolutely dominate guys in the big leagues, and I'm like, I just did what they do.
Yeah, what if I could do that every time?
Why can't I do that majority of the time? It's like you string together a few of those, and then you start to get that confidence. I feel like that just kind of ebbs and it like goes together. Yeah. And then once you start to get that, then it's like, oh shit. A year ago, I was looking at like, all right, like I'm just trying to stay up here. I'm just trying to keep a job. Like I'm an average big leaguer. Whereas now it's like I'm a dominating big leaguer.
Yeah.
And that's what like my mindset changed like this year versus last year with the Mariners or the year before with the Mariners. It was, I was scratching and clawing to keep a job. And then once I found out, like once I had some success there, and then I had some success early on last year, I was like, why is that my mindset of just trying to stay here? Why am I not trying to be a name, like be a big name here?
Yeah, I remember I kind of had the similar feeling as I worked my way through the different levels of the minor leagues. Was at each new level, it's like you kind of get your bearings for the first month or first however many outings. And then at some point you realize like, oh, I am good enough to be at this level. And then you settle in, then you find a groove. Like how was that transition for you in the big leagues? Was it like, first outing you kind of immediately saw that like your stuff was good enough, I'm here for a reason, you had that like swagger? Or was it, I don't quite know if I belong, you're feeling it out, you're like getting to know your teammates, you're getting to feel used to playing in front of bigger crowds, and then you hit your stride? Like,
I think it was more of the first, like what you said first, of like, because both years I've gotten off to like hot starts. So I think there wasn't that learning curve per se, or there wasn't that like trying to get comfortable for me. It was more of like, I hit the ground running. Now it's like, I have to maintain that. Like I feel like I always start pretty strong. So it's like, I never have that. I definitely know what you're talking about, like hitting the different levels throughout the minor leagues, but for some reason in the big leagues it was kind of different, where it was just, I think it's because I did have that instant success.
Right.
I was like, oh, hey, I'm good enough to be here. Like it wasn't where I like went out there my first couple and just got punched in the mouth. I was like, holy shit.
Were you surprised by that? Like first outing, you're like, realize like, oh, my stuff is as good as 90% of the guys out here. Like I have like I can strike out, so-and-so all-star hitter. Like, were you surprised by that? or did you kind of already, obviously like you knew that your stuff would technically play at the next level because you'd seen like, okay, I know I throw 96 miles an hour. I know my slider moves this much. I know my changeup moves this much. And you can compare that to guys who are having success. So like, you know it in the back of your mind, but did you still surprise yourself in some sense when you went out there and did it? Or was just like, I've been prepared for this for years and it was just more of a formality once you actually went out there?
Yeah, I would say I was more surprised, like in the year that I made my debut, I would think I was more surprised because I knew I wasn't pitching at my best. Like I was still getting outs like that first month, but I knew deep down like my fastball wasn't good.
Right.
Like the velo wasn't there. I've had way better velo in the past. I've had way better metrics in the past. My slider was very inconsistent. The only thing that I really had was like a changeup. And like, so in the back of my mind, I was like, whoa, like this isn't the best version of myself, but I'm still having some success.
Right.
And so I was more surprised by that, I would say.
The fact that you just didn't have to be perfect.
Yes, because you have that idea of in the big leagues you can't make any mistakes. Like you have the idea that you have to be perfect every single time you go out there. It's baseball. Like I had a coach, our assistant hitting coach Hessman. He sat me down this year and we had that conversation where he was relating it from a hitter's point of view, but to a pitcher's point of view too. Right. Where we had one of our hitters, I think Torque, he had scorched like 3 balls on a line, but right to guys, and had nothing to show for it. But like exit velo, all of them were like around 100, just absolutely blistering the balls, and he was pissed.
Right.
Like absolutely pissed off. And then I had an outing where I had a 1-2-3, but it was sloppy. Like I got lucky. Like I was leaving stuff up over in the middle, like was not executing at all, but like got outs. And like I was a little upset with myself because I was like, I'm better than that. I need to be better than that. If I want to be who I think I want to be, I can't have outings like that.
Right.
And he came up to me and he was like, were you at your best? And I was like, no. And he was like, well, you just got 3 up, 3 down in the big leagues. He was like, so what does that tell you? I was like, I'm good enough to be here. And he's like, yeah, and you don't have to be perfect every time. It's like, even on your not so good day, you're still good enough to be here to get out. And like that kind of like opened my eyes.
It shifted things in your mind.
Where it was like, oh, like we don't have to put all that pressure on ourselves. We don't have to be perfect because just like whenever we make mistakes, those guys make mistakes too. They miss their pitches all the time. So it's like,
and you're seeing how everybody else is dealing with struggles at different times throughout the year, and like, oh, if you're having up and down, you're like, that guy just had a rough month last year, or last month, and he figured it out. Like, I'm gonna get through this as well. I'm gonna have bad outings. So
it's baseball. It's just like you're gonna dot. You go back now. Granted, it probably wasn't the best pitch at the time, but I gave up a homer to Mike Trout earlier this year, and I had him. I think the count was either 0-2 or 1-2, and I had done it all year where I had thrown sliders down and away with 2 strikes, and if they took, I was like, perfect. I'm going fastball right off of that line. I'm going to freeze them down and away. Had them right where I wanted them, 1-2, execute 97-mile-an-hour heater below the zone, down and away, right where I want it. Dude takes me right center for a home run, and I'm like sitting there just like, what? Like the catcher's like, he kind of like has his hands up, we get in the dugout, and he's like, dude, you executed your pitch. I don't know what to tell you. Like, you just got to tip your cap. That's Mike Trout. And I was like, yeah, like that sucks. But at the end of the day, you have to look at it as if like sometimes you're going to execute, you're going to do what you're going to do, and they're going to beat you. Just like you're going to leave one right down the middle and they're going to roll one over on it when they should have put it in the seats. So it's like, that's baseball. That's why we play the game. Like, that's what's beautiful about it.
I can think back to Kyle Wright, who, I've worked with for a couple of years now, and like, he was up and down big leagues, AAA, and he really struggled with when he would get to the big leagues. He would try to push, he would try to be perfect. He would, his stuff would play down. He would start trying to nibble, start trying to be so fine. And for him, it was really a similar thing. It was like, as soon as that light switched in his head to like, this is no different than AAA.
Yeah.
This is just like, I'm going to go out there, attack, compete, do everything I can, and let the cards fall where they fall. I'm going to throw my best stuff. I'm going to trust it. I'm going to have to go in there with a game plan. And as soon as he kind of had that moment where he realized like it's no different. It's just baseball. It's just attacking. It's just doing what I've always done. That was really the turning point for him. And obviously, like, you see what he did this year, but it's just the parallels between what he went through and what you're saying it's almost an identical scenario.
Yeah. And I remember talking to Scooble during the year this year. We were sitting on the bench. I think it was like during my COVID stint, and I had just had a really good stretch. Like, I think I went like nine appearances or something, maybe, or 9 innings or something like that, and just absolutely dominated. Like, almost had 2 Ks an inning, and like it was the best that I had ever felt. And he asked me, he was like, what's going through your mind whenever you're in that zone? And I was like, dude, it feels like autopilot. Like, I'm not thinking about anything, and I'm on offense. Like, I step on the mound, and I am not scared to throw anything. And I'm not scared to throw anything down the middle either. Like, I'm literally just like, whatever the catcher throws down, I have 100% confidence that it doesn't matter if I miss my spot, he's missing it. And so I was on such an attack, whereas like if I came in and executed that first pitch, I knew that they had no chance that day. And it's so different because then you go to the flip side where like I had a stretch where I was struggling this season, and I was over here like kind of like what you were saying, where it's like, well, shit, I know I don't have my best stuff. Like I got to kind of nibble. Like I can't afford to miss. I have to keep it in this realm. Like I have to keep it out of the bad path. I have to keep it out of the middle of the zone. And it's just the mindsets are polar opposite. But it really affects the way that you pitch.
Right. How much of that is a self-fulfilling prophecy? Like you see that maybe your stuff isn't as good, so then you start to change your mentality, you change your approach, and then that makes you actually start to execute worse. Versus like even if you have a bad bullpen before going into the game, you still force yourself to have that same aggressive. I mean, it's easier said than done, obviously. But how much do you feel like that plays into it? Like are you doing any sort of consistent mental routine to try to get yourself in that attack mode, even on days where you don't have your best stuff? Because some days it's going to come naturally, and you're just like, I have it. Like, they're screwed. Other days you don't have it. How do you get yourself in that same mentality, or how do you at least try to give yourself the best chance of getting to that same spot?
I mean, that's something I'm still trying to like kind of work on. Like, that's, for me, it's not necessarily like based on bullpens. Like there's sometimes we talk about this like as bullpen guys, it's kind of like a funny cliche thing where it's like, if you're good out in the bullpen, you're typically horse crap out the game. And so how my pen is before I go out there, it doesn't really bother me, because I've had times where like I didn't even throw a strike. Like I remember I had an outing where literally I didn't throw one in the zone in the bullpen. I went out and got 1, 2, 3, and after the game, I'm dying laughing. I go to the pitching coach. I was like, how nervous were you? He was like, dude, I was praying for you whenever you got out there, because I was like, I don't know where the ball's going to go. But then I went out there and I was dialed. So like there's something about, kind of like what we were talking about earlier, like I have to have like that hitter in there. I have to have that competitiveness where it's like, it's me versus you, let's freaking go. Versus like in the bullpen, it's just me and the catcher, like you're trying to feel things out. But I think personally, whenever I start to like go back and forth between those mindsets, it's as bad as it is, it's tailored on the results. Like and that's the hardest thing about baseball is like you go out and you have, a couple 1, 2, 3s, a couple, punch out 2 guys, punch out the side, and you're like, like I'm on top of the world.
Start to feel yourself a little bit.
And it's easy. Yeah, it's easy to keep that going. But then I had those 9 appearances or 9 innings where it did really well, and then like I had one where I just felt out of whack and gave up a run or 2, and then it's like you start to press that much more the next time, because you're like, I got to get back onto the zeros.
It makes you realize how much of a mental game baseball really is, because like when it's going well, it's the easiest thing in the world, and when it's going bad, it's the hardest thing in the world. And that's the ups and downs. That's the struggle of, I mean, for hitters too, obviously, but as being a pitcher, like that's what makes the guys at the very top of their game for, a decade, like so impressive. Because they're able to be so consistent when they have games when they're out of whack. They have games when they just don't have their best stuff. You've had bullpens right before the game where you don't throw a single strike. Like what are some of the biggest misconceptions that people have about big league pitchers? Like I know, or maybe that you had, where you thought everybody was like perfect or never missed a spot. Never, like what are some of the misconceptions you had, or you think the average person has, the average minor leaguer might have about the guys at the top level?
I would say that's one, is like people, they say that you can't afford to miss spots up there, where it's like, and we have this conversation. I think it's a good debate, honestly. It's like what ranks higher as far as do you want to have elite command, or do you want to have elite stuff? And I think the game is kind of, especially more towards the bullpen, you start to see guys that just have elite stuff and they've got okay command. And it's like, but they're able to get away with it. Like there's
just so much room for error at that point.
And it's like, so there's plenty of times where like like I said earlier, where I've missed my spots or like wasn't my best slider or something, but I was able to get somebody out because even though it wasn't my best slider, metrically it was still pretty decent. So it's like I don't want to sound cocky when I say this, but it's like I feel like we make it a lot harder than it should be. You know, like whenever you make it to the big leagues, you're obviously good enough to be there. You don't have to change what you've done to get there. And so I think that's what a lot of people do is like as they start to move up levels, they're like, all right, like, yeah, I moved up a level, but like now I got to tighten this up. I got to do this or I got to change this. It's like, no, you don't. Like,
well, especially if you've had a stretch, like especially if you make it to the big leagues and you have a stretch of success, that's your proof of concept that like, hey, I actually, maybe that is my formula. Maybe I don't need to change anything. Like, you had a 1, 2, 3 month stretch where you were one of the better relievers in the big leagues, and that, if anything, that just reinforces that like that's your formula. Like that, you don't necessarily maybe just refining and tweaking slight up, changes in your approach, or obviously we're working on some things and we can get into that as well. But you have the confidence that like that's a formula that works for you.
And I think that's what's good about like having you in the back pocket is because, and it's not just me, there's a lot of guys that do this from talking to them. It's like, as soon as you have like those 2 or 3 bad outings, now it's like,
you start searching.
Everything. And I'm very, like, I do that all the time where it's like, oh, what's going on? Like, I wasn't throwing 96, 97 today. Like I was 93, 94. Like something's got to be like sound the alarms. Like something's wrong. Where it's like you go and like talk to you and it's like, no, like it's one thing. Or it's like, hey, you've thrown 3 outings, like 3 out of 4 days. Like you're a little gassed. Or how's your travel been? Or like it's something that can be completely unrelated to what I'm doing on the mound. That's kind of out of my control. Where it's just I had a down day, which you're allowed to have those. And so I think that's where I kind of shifted where the numbers and all that is good to kind of just have a baseline of where it's like you start struggling a little bit, look what your numbers were when they were the best, and then kind of see, oh, hey, this is a little bit different. Okay, let's kind of explore this option a little bit rather than just freaking grasping at straws trying to figure out what the heck's going on.
And that's where I kind of see like my role and like our coaches' roles with our big leaguers, with our pro guys in season. It's way more of a collaboration. It's a collaborative role. It's having another set of eyes. Mm-hmm. It's there for helping with the consistency of what's going on, to be able to troubleshoot when there are issues.
Yeah.
It's not overhauling your lifting routine in season. It's not overhauling your approach. It's when something doesn't go right, it's preventing that guy from spinning out and just completely getting derailed.
Yeah.
Right. It's I can think back to the adductor issue this year. Like you had a slight tweak in the adductor groin area, and like that could have easily spiraled into, let's throw through it. Let's not take any time off. It turns into a more severe thing.
Yeah.
Now you miss a month. Now you miss 6 weeks, and it didn't. And so I view my role as more like just keeping the guy on the train tracks in case because things are not going to go perfect. Like if you had a perfect season where nothing ever went wrong, like great, you're an all-star.
Yeah.
But that is so rare that there isn't something that goes wrong.
Yeah.
And so again, I view myself more as like helping guys like you just like stay on the train tracks.
That goes along with like our catcher Tucker Barnhart like said this, and I was like, wow, that's very good from his perspective as a catcher. And you can tie this into pitching in the game, but also during the season.
Right.
And so he was like, majority of the outings, I'd say about 20% of your outings, you're going to be on. Like, I'm not going to it doesn't matter what I call, you're going to execute and whatever. Another 20% is you don't have anything that day, and you just got to find a way to get an out. And he's like, it's that percentage in the middle that we've got to navigate where it's just like you're average that day, where it's like you're not super on, but you're not terrible that day. Right. So he's like, as a catcher, that's what I have to know where you are as a pitcher, and I have to navigate and work with you and collaborate and try to figure out how we're going to get these next 3 outs. And it's the same thing throughout the season. It's like every time you go out there, you're not going to have your A game. There's going to be some games you are. There's going to be some games you go out there and you're absolutely terrible. But it's the majority of that season, it's like I've got to navigate. Like I've got to navigate my way through the season. I might be a little banged up like in my groin area. I might be a little banged up in my forearm area, but I've got to try to find a way to get through, to get to the next month, to get to the next outing. And I feel like those go hand in hand, and that's kind of like.
What do you feel as far as the role of like your pitch data, your metrics? Obviously, like some guys are very, very into knowing their own numbers. Like where do you fall in that spectrum? Like are you constantly like looking at exactly where your fastball was on that particular outing, your different movement metrics. Do you feel like that's helpful, or do you feel like some guys kind of like definitely overanalyze that and dive too into the weeds? Like, how do you fall in that spectrum, and how did some of the other guys, on the Tigers fall in that spectrum?
I definitely think it can be detrimental, because I fell victim to that. Like, I dove into the rabbit hole and tried to, like, I analyzed every outing by the numbers and not by the results. And I remember it was actually this past spring training. We had Andrew Chafin. We had just signed him. He'd been there for like 3 days. And after every outing, they come and put a packet of all of our numbers on there. Right. And I had thrown an outing, and I did really well. But I was a little pissed off because, like, my vert was terrible. But I went 1, 2, 3. And so, like, I'm looking there, and I'm, like, talking to a guy right next to my locker, and I'm like, golly, dude, like, I can't, my vert is not where it needs to be. And he's, like, over there, and he goes, Vest, didn't you throw 1, 2, 3? And I was like, yeah. And he goes, then shut the hell up. And I was like, all right. And so, like, that was his approach, where he was like, I don't care what these numbers say. I'm just going to get outs. And at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. Like, that's how you keep a job, is if you get outs. Now, the numbers have a role. It's like, it's helped guys get to the big leagues because they're outliers in certain things. And it's like, they look at some of the numbers that can kind of help them and really figure out, like, okay, hey, I'm an outlier in this realm. I'm going to attack that and make that my strength. And then once they do that, it's like, oh, wow, this guy's a great pitcher.
It's just not getting lost in the numbers to where you lose sight of what, hey, we're actually out here to get batters out.
Yeah.
Right. If you accomplish that goal, like, that's
exactly,
that is a successful outing.
So, and that's where, like, how I felt like I did a little bit better job this year versus in 21, whereas 21, it was all about the numbers. Like, I was worried about where my vert was, where was my velo, and what's going on. Like, even whenever I was having success, I was still trying to chase those numbers. And then this year, if I had a good outing, I was like, hey, I must have been doing something right. Like, so that, like, I think we've talked about this too, where it's just the numbers aren't the whole story. There's so much more that goes into it. There's the deception. It's just how quickly the balls get on you. We've had our pitching coach, after a few outings, some of the guys that AJ has managed in the past, he'll reach out to him and just be like, hey, what'd you have on this guy? Right. And multiple guys have come up to me, even though my ball doesn't have a lot of ride or have elite ride, they're like, dude, the thing gets on you quick. They're like, it is coming quick and it's coming up and in. Right. And so I have to use that to my advantage, even though the numbers say the fastball numbers or the movement profile is average. I've had guys say, like, nah, dude, like, it gets on you pretty quick. Like, it plays pretty well. So I used it more this year, trying to figure out what the hitters were telling me, and then looking and seeing, okay, this is different. So there was a time whenever I started going downhill a little bit, much like my problem in 21, I started sinking the ball again. And I could tell, because pitches that I was throwing up in the zone, I wasn't getting the same results that I was getting the first 2 or 3 months in the season. Where those guys were, where I was getting swing and misses or pop-ups, now they were starting to barrel the ball. And I was like, okay, something's going on. I need to start looking at the numbers. And that's kind of how I use it now, where it's like, if I start kind of going downhill a little bit, it's like, okay, let's look and see what's different. Here's where I was and I was doing good. Here's where I am now. Okay, this is different. This is what I need to attack. So that's kind of how I use the numbers now, I would say.
I gotcha. How do you feel, just to kind of switch gears, like, how do you feel about guys that start off as a position player, like guys that don't necessarily pitch their entire lives? Do you feel like that was an advantage for you? Like, I think to, like, Jacob deGrom, right? Yeah. Like, a guy who transitioned to pitching super late in his career and had so much more room to continue to grow from that point on. Do you feel like that helped with the athleticism side of it? Do you feel like that helped with not having to think about your mechanics? Like, what was that? First off, like, when did you decide to transition to pitching and why? And then what was that transition like for you initially?
I transitioned because I couldn't hit. Yeah. I was decent, like, in the field. Like, I could field pretty well, but I couldn't hit at all. So
were you an outfielder?
No, I was shortstop.
Shortstop.
So I played shortstop my freshman and sophomore year. And at the end of my sophomore year, our pitching was not good. And so I would always go to our hitting coach, and I was like, hey, let me jump on the mound. Like, let me just throw a pin. And
did you always throw hard across the infield?
Yeah, so my freshman year, I got clocked at like 91 across the diamond, which I was surprised. I weighed like $170, but I had finally, that was my first time, like, getting into a weight, like we were in the weight room every day. Like I was starting to put on weight. I was starting to put on strength. And so one day in the fall, they just clocked us and I threw 91. I was like, what the heck? Like I didn't know I had that.
Right.
And so those first 2 years, like I knew I had a decent arm across the diamond. And I don't know, I just kept kind of bugging our coach. I was like, hey, let me try it. I never pitched. Like in high school, we didn't really have another shortstop, and my arm always kind of bugged me. So like I never pitched. And so then, yeah, I just threw a bullpen one day and they were just like, all right, let's do it. So I showed up my junior year and I was supposed to be a two-way guy, and I was so dumb about the way I went about it. Like I would do a full practice at shortstop, throw balls across the infield, then I'd go throw a bullpen at the end and do absolutely no arm care.
Right.
Like my throwing mechanics were not good. I was a thrower. Like I just threw hard. And so I blew out and had Tommy John. So then I came back after Tommy John my redshirt junior year, and I just pitched, and that's when I got drafted. So I was like, all right, I'm going to go straight into only pitching, put everything I got into it. I was looking up videos on YouTube, like of Clemens, Martinez, all these guys, like trying to figure out how to pitch. And my first 2 years in pro ball, I was still a thrower. Like all I would do is just try to blow it by guys. But I definitely think having that athleticism of that position has helped me throughout, because I just feel like you can get something a lot quicker. It's like I think back to whenever me and you started training together in 20. I was an extreme load up on the backside, super tall, and just over the top, let it eat. And you were like, yeah, it's great. Like you can get up to 97, but it's like, you know, one day you're 92 to 93, one day you're 96 to 97, you're leaving stuff up, you have no command. It's like, let's get something that's a little bit more controllable, more consistent. And that's whenever we made it a more athletic move, where I was moving a little bit kind of like Bueller or DeGrom, like having the drift and doing all that. And we did that in probably 2 months, like where I fully was like, all right, I got it. And I go to instructs and best I ever threw. Like velo was way higher than it has been, like the average velo. My off speed was good, and like I completely changed my mechanics, and it took me like 2 months to do. And so like some guys, they fight their whole careers to try to change something in their delivery, but I felt like having that base of just learning to throw from different positions, like throwing from down here, jump throws, doing all that at shortstop, I feel like I have good awareness of my body to be able to change little things.
Yep, and that's one of the things I've noticed with, you know, I'm lucky enough now to coach primarily big leaguers as far as the guys that I personally work with. But the biggest difference between them and like the average high school player, the average college pitcher, to me, it's not like they're necessarily taller, it's not like they're necessarily stronger. Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. It's their overall body awareness. Like I think athleticism is the awareness of where your body is in space. These guys are so in tune with what their body's doing, they can make adjustments a lot quicker. Versus like you might spend months trying to make an adjustment with a high school kid who just doesn't have very good body awareness. Whereas like a big leaguer or just a really athletic, you know, pro or college pitcher who you're like, okay, he has the potential to, you know, pitch at that level one day. Like they'll make the adjustment in a day or a week in a lot of cases.
Yeah, I remember whenever I had first gotten drafted, one off season I was coaching, trying to make some like money during the off season and helping out some teams. And I think it was like a dad of a player had come up to me and he was like, oh, like you're in pro ball, like that's awesome. He's like, man, don't you ever wish you were just like 6'5", 6'7", like doing and just, you know, being able to really just let it eat? And I'm like, no, like I'm very content with what I've got, because like I have good control over my body. Like I know how to make it move down the mound. So like I know the misconception is just because you're bigger, you're gonna throw harder, and it's like those guys sometimes have the hardest time because they've got way more body to worry about.
They've got longer levers. They have
and so it's just like it's harder for them to get control of it and learn how to move correctly. Where it's like with me, like I can feel athletic. And it's like that's why you're starting to see a lot of guys that are in the big leagues that are 5'9", 5'10", that are letting it rip at 98. So it's like, yeah, there are some guys too that are bigger. You look at Chapman, you look at Shohei, you look at those guys. I just feel like you don't have to be super big and super strong to be a guy that lights up the radar gun. I think the lowest hanging fruit is just the athleticism and being able to control your body movement. And it's like,
so what do you feel are some of your keys or like differentiators in terms of getting the most out of your body specifically? Because I'm sure there's a lot of 5'8" or 5'9" or 6 foot tall pitchers watching this right now, and they're trying to figure out how to throw upper 90s or mid 90s or even 90 miles an hour and get the most out of their body. And there is that misconception that you have to be 6'4", you have to be 6'5" to throw hard. But a lot of people don't realize like some of those guys don't move that efficiently. They get away with inefficiently they move because they have such long levers.
Yeah.
But you've had to learn to get as much as you possibly can out of your body. What are you, 6 foot?
6. Yeah.
Yeah, 6 foot, 200 right now, 205.
Yeah, I'm a little bit more.
A little
like
bit above that.
Yeah.
210, 6 foot 210.
Probably during the season. My weight during the season is probably like 205. I usually lose weight. Yeah.
What have been like? What are like the 1 or 2 mechanical keys for you that you feel like let you get the most out of your body?
So I mean, we talk about this all the time, where it's like when I feel explosive, that's when I know like I'm gonna have it that day. And I mean, it goes hand in hand, just like being able to move quick. So an explosive for me is like being athletic and strong at the same time. It's like feeling like almost like I'm a leopard, like where it's just
right.
you know, somebody that's quick, that can like move fast, but like be strong in those movements
without being overly tense.
Yeah, so it's like every year whenever we go to spring training, we do some testing, like rotational power, like on the Kaiser, and every year like I'm one of the top guys up there because like I feel like I'm able to just be explosive in my movements, and that's how I train. Is like everything that I do is I want to be strong and fast whenever I'm doing it. So it's like, yeah, we do a little bit. I remember whenever we first started training together, my overall strength wasn't the best. So like we spent like a month or two, and it was also different because it was COVID. So I had a long time before we were in game. So we spent like 2 or 3 months working on the overall strength. And then it was like, once we started getting closer to me going to actually competition and throwing, it was like, all right, let's drop the weight. Now it's like, how fast can we move with that power that we just created? And so with me, I think that's what my goal every offseason is, like first month or two, kind of work on that strength. And then from there, it's like, okay, now let's transfer that strength to power and explosiveness and being able to just get into the ground and off the ground, like jumping and doing lateral jumps, sprinting, like doing all that. Because whenever you think about the throw, it's an explosive movement.
Right.
Like you have to move down the mound fast. So
you kind of touched on it. It's almost this like oxymoron where you want to try to throw as hard as you can, but you also can't tense up. So it needs to be quick, but also explosive, but also springy. Like sometimes I'll use the analogy of like, and you use the leopard analogy, which I think is spot on. But you know, maybe you have somebody doing like a shuffle throw or a pull down, and they're just like really heavy on their feet. They're like, you can tell they're tensing up. And I'll say, have you ever seen like a high jumper approach the bar?
Yeah.
Like they're springy, there's rhythm, but there's also explosion.
Yeah.
It's well timed. They're not just like lumbering to the ball, like, and then trying to jump. It's like there's a looseness, there's a relaxed feeling to that. Is that kind of what you feel on the mound? How does that?
Well, for sure. Like that's literally what I would do this year. Like a couple weeks ago, whenever I hit 100 on a pull down, I was trying to feel that. So like before each rep, like I'm sitting there and I'm kind of like hopping on my toes, like bouncing, just trying to feel like loose and just like light off my feet. So it's like, then I go into a shuffle, and I'm literally, I told you this, like I'm trying to get into the ground hard, but get off of it as fast as I can too. Where it's like, I'm trying to stay, it's not like, I don't want to be like I'm dancing or like that I'm trying to stay light on my feet. Like I'm not trying to do that. Like I'm trying to be powerful, but moving in and off of that ground as fast as I can. So like that's why I like to do like little hops whenever I go, and then boom, I go right into it. And that's whenever I feel like my best. So I'm trying to get that to transfer. Like you see guys like the Clevenger thing, like you're seeing a lot of guys start to do that where they're kind of like rocking. Like that's our version of pitchers of like, obviously we can't just sit there and jump on the mound before we go, but like that's our version of just trying to stay like loose. Now boom, I'm gonna get it.
I'll call that like the hot feet cue. Like Josh Hader does that as well, but when you come set, it's not just like feeling static.
Yeah.
You know, kind of coming set, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Now pause, now go.
Yeah, and so like that's, you see like those guys, they're trying to stay loose, but they're also like quick twitch guys where they're able to just freaking use that ground and get powerful down the mound.
Do you feel like athleticism? Obviously, we talked about the athletic base and like, you know, growing up, you know, playing multiple sports, being a position player first, shortstop, throwing from different arm angles. So you had that athletic base. Do you feel like that's something that athleticism is something that you will lose over time if you don't continually train it? Or do you feel like having that athletic base coming up was enough that you don't have to continue to work on it? Or do you think you should always have to have something in your throwing routine, in your lifting, that continually reinforces that athletic component?
I think to a certain extent, it's almost like training, like sprinting, right? Like if you go like weeks and weeks without training sprinting, like you're gonna kind of lose everything that you built up. Or even just like in the weight room in general, it's like you kind of have to have some sort of maintenance to it. And I think having like the way that we structure our workouts or the way that we do our throwing, I think that is our maintenance of the athleticism. Like we do try to keep things as athletic as possible. Like there's been times where literally like whenever I come in for my catch play, like I'm like, all right, let's go, get rid of it. And we'll just like go like that, try to get it in and out of our glove as quickly as possible. Just like let the body naturally take over. And so like, that's why I think it is good. Like obviously maybe not for health reasons for like pro guys, but like to go play like basketball or do all those other stuff, because they're just different movements, but they're athletic movements. And so I think that's definitely good. But I definitely think the most important thing is having the base as a kid, because those are kind of like your motor patterns that you're going to have the rest of your life. You can obviously, I think, change them to an extent, but for the most part, like what you do and what base you create whenever you're younger, that's going to kind of go with you. So I think it's kind of like riding a bike. Like for the most part, you're going to have that athleticism with you. I think there's definitely some things that you can do to kind of keep yourself a little bit more athletic throughout. I mean, but it's also, how do you define athleticism?
Right.
Some guys define it a lot differently than others. It's like, is it how fast you can sprint? Is it how well you can play multiple sports? Is it how well your body moves? So I don't know. I think I've always looked at it as if like how good your body moves and how well you can adapt to playing multiple sports. Like that's how I kind of look at it as athleticism. So I think the more and more you play more sports, the more athletic you're going to be.
So as a converted position player, a lot of times those guys don't have amazing feel for off speed. However, for you, I would argue, your changeup might be your best pitch. Your slider, again, it's up there as well.
Yeah.
How did you start throwing a Vulcan changeup? And can you show us how you throw the Vulcan changeup?
Yeah.
And what's the story behind that?
So whenever I started pitching, I was like, all right, I got to figure out my pitches. Like obviously I can't just throw fastballs. My slider, which I think is the reason I got Tommy John, I literally had it right here and I was like, okay, I know it's supposed to go that way, so I'm just going to throw it and turn my wrist. So I literally was here, and I think that's why I blew out, which that's changed over the time. But my changeup, we had our Friday night guy was Cameron Gann. He was drafted by the Diamondbacks, but he was like the best pitcher that I knew at the time. I was like, all right, I got to go up to him because he had a gross changeup. And I was like, dude, you got to show me how you throw your changeup. I'm trying to figure this out. And he was in pro ball. It was his first year, the year that I started pitching. And so he was back during the offseason, like training with us. And so he just came up to me and was like, yeah, like I stuck it in my hand as far as I could go, and I would stretch out my two middle fingers, and I just throw it just like that. Like I don't think about anything. I don't try to manipulate the ball. I just throw it. So whenever I first started throwing it, I literally that thing was so jammed into my hands like this, and I would just hold it right there. So my fingers were together, and literally immediately, like I threw like two or three like in catch play, and they moved, and I was like, oh, cool. And
did you have to train that finger flexibility?
So yeah, he told me, he was just like, yeah, like it's gonna be a learning curve, like it's not gonna feel comfortable. So like my first I would say week with it, like it didn't feel good because I was trying to stretch that out, but it's definitely changed over time. So from then I would throw it and the movement was great, but I didn't really have great command of it.
Right.
And so I went up to my coach and I was like, hey, I'm throwing my changeup like this, and movement's great, I just don't really know where it's going. What do you think I should do? And he was like, well, you have it deep in your hand and you've got your fingers together. He was like, to command the ball a little bit better, let's just put more fingers on the ball and get it a little bit closer to your fingertips. And so I just did that to where I wasn't as far deep and it was more on my fingertips, and I spread out the fingers on the ball, and from then on I felt like I had a little bit better command with it. So from there it's kind of just stayed the same ever since then.
You just try to throw just like a fastball, throw through it, or you actively think about pronating or getting on the inside of the ball or anything like that?
No, so I naturally pronate, so I don't really have to think about doing any of that. I think that's honestly kind of bad for me sometimes, because I have tried to mess around with just a regular circle change, and in my mind I'm like, all right, I gotta pronate, and so I think I almost over pronate whenever I do that, and that's why I was never able to really throw that. That's another reason why I've always thrown this, is because I've never been able to throw a regular changeup. I mean, this was the first thing that I did, and then I've never really tried to veer from it. Like I've messed around and catch play and like on the mound to see if I could do this, but it doesn't move as well.
Yeah,
so.
It's interesting that you kind of mentioned how you naturally have like a pronation bias. Usually we'll see guys have either a supination bias and really easy time throwing, curveball, sliders.
Yeah.
Maybe fastball has some natural cut to it. Or you'll see guys who, they can pick up a changeup really easily. And one of the first times they throw, they'll find the changeup grip that fits for them, and almost immediately it's like gross pitch if they have more of a pronation bias.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like where you fit on that spectrum. But you also are a guy who has a really nasty slider. So would you be able to show us your slider grip, and we can kind of tie into why that pitch and that specific grip for you works despite you having more of a pronation bias?
Yeah. So that was the other thing is like whenever I first started throwing or pitching, I was a curveball guy.
Right.
But I didn't have great command of it in the zone. So I was like, I want to throw something a little bit harder that I can command in the zone a little bit.
Was that a loopier curveball?
Yeah. So like my scouting report in college was like, it was basically fastball, curveball in the dirt. Like that's what I would do to righties. And so once I got to pro ball, you're facing a little bit better hitters. It's like, all right, they're gonna get that scouting report, and it's like once you get to 2 strikes, if you can't show that you can land that in the zone, they're just gonna spit. Like you can throw a banger all day, like in the dirt, but it's like you got to be able to show that you can throw it in the zone, and I just couldn't really do that. So I had started it right here where I just spiked it with the fingertip, which a lot of guys do. I know you said Wright does it, McCullers, all those guys, they do it. But one day in catch play, a guy just told me, he was like, hey, instead of going here, just put your knuckle on it. So I was right here above the seam, and I would put my knuckle on it. And always with my curveball too, I would absolutely throw it as hard as I could. Like every pitch that I throw, I'm thinking fastball. Just letting the grip change what it does. And so in catch play, I threw it, and it immediately tightened up, like came out like a fastball and just fell off. And I was like, oh, wow, that's a lot better. So I've always had to spike or have something different with this finger for a slider or a curveball because I am that pronation guy. So that helps.
Have you ever tried, I'm assuming you tried grips where you didn't have the spike, where you know, more traditional grips.
Not good.
And it's to where you almost like have to over supinate to make that pitch move at all.
And it just feels like you're trying, like for me, whenever I do this and I go and throw, like it feels weird. And it's like you're almost trying to manipulate the ball too much. Like I feel like I'm trying to bring in my wrist too much, and I'm trying to get out in front. Whereas this, for some reason, it just keeps my wrist locked this way a little bit longer before I come through and I actually pronate after. Whereas if I do this, like I feel like I'm trying to do here, but I just get behind it too much.
You would have to manipulate so much in terms of actual wrist position.
Yeah, and it doesn't feel comfortable.
With the spike in particular, you can throw it more like a fastball, but you're able to get on the outside of the ball because of the spike.
Yeah.
So you can rip through it, and that ripping through it is what creates that gyro.
And you're just able to just rip it like a fastball. I mean, there's been times that I've gotten this thing up to like 90, and it's just got the tight movement. It's like, all right, that's the one that I want. Whereas like if I had 2 fingers on the ball, it would just pop out and it'd be like 83, 84. And it's like, that's not.
And you also alluded to like how easy of a pitch that can be to learn. Like that's almost the first place I'll go when I'm trying to teach a slider to somebody. Is like, or even a hard curveball, power curveball, similar like a slurve.
Yeah.
Because it's so easy, you can grip it in that specific way and just rip through it like a fastball. There's no like learning to manipulate wrist position to the same extent. Grip it, throw it.
Yeah, because I just feel like there's, I guess, a little bit more room for error with it, because you do, whenever you have this, you've got 2 fingers on the ball. It's just that wrist position has to be perfect whenever you're releasing it. And for me, it just feels like it's easier for it to come off of that one finger rather than both of those fingers, because I'm not able to maintain that supination. I'm starting to go this way, and that's whenever it starts to straighten out and flatten out and just kind of spins. Whereas this, it's just like it doesn't have both of those fingers to come off of, so I can go to that early pronation like I do, because it's only getting past that one finger rather than doing both of those. So do you manipulate the ball at all if you're trying to execute like a 2-strike one or get a swing strike versus dump it in dump it in over the plate? Or like for example, like Lance McCullers will, he'll try to add additional pressure through that finger when he's trying to spike it. Yeah. And that's the only thing he changes. He's not necessarily changing the focal point as much as actual pressure on the grip. Or are you keeping the exact same grip and everything, and you're more just changing the focal point of where you're trying to attack? and we've been kind of working on this past week, is my movement profile on it isn't the most consistent. So I don't want to have a bunch of different changing variables to it. My thought process is trying to stay the same. My grip's trying to be the same every time. My movement's trying to be the same every time. I'm just trying to take my movement from, if I'm throwing a strike, it's right here. If I'm trying to throw 2 strikes or strikeout pitch, it's right here. Like, I'm not trying to change the movement or change like how it's coming out or anything like that.
Right.
Like, for me, it's just trying to stay the same every time.
Awesome.
So,
What would you say for this coming year? Like, what are your biggest goals? Like, what would be a successful season for you moving forward? What are some of your top goals?
yeah, I mean, we talked about a couple days ago with Cohen, just like first year with the Mariners, it was like a month and a half. This year it was like 2 to 3 months. Like, the first half did really well. Like, I just want to be consistent that whole way through. My number one goal every year is to be there start to finish. So it's hard to stay on a big league roster. It's hard to make it to arbitration. It's hard to get paid if you're not healthy. Right. So my biggest thing is, number one priority every year is I want to be healthy. Start to finish, be a guy that I can be relied on, because we saw it this year with our team in particular, is just we had so many guys go down, and it's hard to win whenever
right.
You've got a new guy coming to fill in every week, because you don't have that same consistency. So first and foremost is being healthy. Number 2 is I want to be able to execute my off speed a little bit more. I think that's going to help me be a more successful pitcher. I've tried to get away from like the external goals, like the stuff that you can't necessarily control. Like, obviously I would love to be an all-star, but there's so much more that goes into that
right.
stuff. Like,
right.
you can't
control that.
You know, like, I remember that was one of my goals my first year. I was like, I want to be an all-star, and one of the bullpen guys with me, he was like, I mean, as a middle reliever, like, you're probably not going to be an all-star. He's
right.
like,
you have to win the closer role first.
Yeah.
And you got to be one of the best closers in the big league.
Exactly. He was like, one of my first year, like, I had like a sub-2 ERA for the first half, and like I did really well, and like I wasn't even talked about being an all-star.
Right.
So it's like those external goals, they're great and they're good accomplishments, but it's like there's so much else that goes into it rather than your control. So I've tried to shift how I do my like goal setting to stuff that I can kind of control. So I want health, number 1, which some of that is out of your hands as well, but you can do everything you can to stay on top of that. But number 2 is just being able to execute off speed. Like in the last year, I was very fastball reliant, and you kind of look at the numbers, it's like my 3rd best pitch. So it's like,
right.
I need to start relying on my off speed and having confidence more in those, rather than like, even though fastball is like my worst analytical pitch, it's the one that I have the most confidence in, because like I feel like I can put it where I want it. So I want to shift that and have the confidence that I have in my fastball with my off speed, and that's one of my goals as well.
I love that you're switching the frame of reference for how you set goals to more process oriented, because the natural reaction for so many people, I know I was this way in high school, it's like you focus on the outcome.
Yep.
And you don't focus on like what's going to actually get you to the outcome. So shifting it to those controllables is like,
yeah,
such a fundamental change that a lot of pitchers don't learn until later on in their careers.
Yeah. And I want to, I'm not a huge like stat nerd, and I don't know like what the best, I guess, ratios are with all, I mean, there's so many stats nowadays with everything. Like, but one thing is I'm going to keep it as simple as possible, is just limit the walks. Like, literally, we had a bet with my pitching coach at one point where I didn't really follow through with it. He never came asking for it, but he was like $20 every walk, and I was like, all right, like, we'll do that. But I wanted to see how long I could go without walking guys, because there's nothing worse than just putting some guy on for nothing, like him not earning it. Now, granted, there are times where, it's part of the game, like you're gonna walk guys. It's honestly probably the smarter thing to do in that situation based on what's going on in the game and things like that. There are times to be a little bit more careful around the zone, but the ones where, you're coming in, nobody on, like you're starting a new inning, we can't walk the first guy, or with 2 outs, we can't walk the guy with 2 outs. So I want to try to really hone in on where I'm not giving away free passes. Like, I want to have a really good number as far as how many walks I've got on the year.
When you attempt to, because again, that you could argue that's still an outcome-oriented goal. Don't walk guys. Are you going out there? Because you might disagree, but like, you almost don't want to go out there thinking, don't walk this batter.
No, it's opposite.
Because you can think, I don't want to walk this guy, or you can think, I'm going to double down on attacking. I'm going to double down on going after and giving him something to hit, like in the zone. Is that how you, like, to attack the goal of not walking batters? How are you thinking about it to actually accomplish that goal? Yeah,
so that for me, that goes hand in hand, where it's like, when I was at my best last year, it was how quickly could I get to 2 strikes? And I wasn't walking anybody, like during that stretch. And it felt like every single hitter that I had them 0-2 or 1-2. And I was like, you're done. Like, once I get you to 0-2, 1-2, it's in my favor. And that's a stat that we keep track of, like on our papers. It's T3PO. It's you're trying to get him out 2 strikes, out or 2 strikes, or put out within 3 pitches. So my main goal and main attack on everybody was, I want to see how fast I can get to 2 strikes on this guy. And once you do that, you're going to limit your walks, your strikeouts are going to go up, and your results are going to be way better. So, and that's a little bit something more that you can control, is I'm trying to get to 2 strikes as fast as I can.
Yeah, I remember, just because I will, watch almost all of your outings, and like you had a lot of outings that were like 7 pitches, 9 pitches,
and that goes with the number one goal, health. Like, you want to be in and out of there as quickly as possible.
100%. So, switch gears a little bit. Like, take me through that first big league outing. Like, take me through the debut. Take me through like what was going through your mind, the call up, like the entire story around that very first big league outing. What you were thinking, and like, was there one specific like welcome to the big leagues moment that you can pinpoint? Maybe that first outing, or in that first like month you were up.
Yeah. So I had a unique situation being Rule 5 to the Mariners. So it wasn't like most stories of being told you're going to the big leagues. Like, I knew there had to be a decision made at the end of spring training. It was either I'm going back to Detroit or I'm on the roster. So that day, I mean, that 2 weeks leading up to that, because when spring training is about to end, you know the day that they have to finalize the roster. I could not sleep, because I honestly did not pitch well in spring training. Like, I didn't do good at all. My first outing was really good, and then from there I started struggling, and I was like, damn, like this isn't good. Like, I don't think I'm gonna make it. And so Scott Service calls me in, and he kind of messed with me a little bit, where he was like, with your situation, we got to make a decision. Do you want to go back to Detroit? And I was like, I mean, not in this case, no. Like, I want to be in the big leagues. And he was like, well, good, because like you made the team. We're happy to have you. And I had always envisioned that moment, and I think I had thought about it too much, where like I was almost in like shock. So like I didn't really react the way that I thought I would have. Like, I just took it. I was like, all right, like, thank you, shook his hand, and left. Like, I always thought like I would just be like, holy shit, like freak out, like start crying, doing all that. Like, nothing. Like, I called my family, like I was good, like called my wife, called everybody. I was like, hey, I made the big leagues, and like I was normal. Like, obviously I had a little bit of emotions. It didn't hit me until I ran out on the field. That's when everybody experiences, like, they get told like they're going to the big leagues for the first time in the office, and like, they break down, they have the emotions. All of that came whenever that bullpen door opened and I ran out on the field for the first time. And I was like, oh my God, like, I'm making my big league debut right now. And it was just completely different than anything like you've done before, because it's like you run out and you see 3 decks, you see a lot of fans out in the stands, and you're like, holy crap. And like, you go up and I step on the mound, and the first guy I'm facing is Evan Longoria. And I'm like, I have a signed picture of this dude hanging up in my apartment at home. Like, my brother gave me he went to an auction, and like, I have 2 brothers. We were all shortstops growing up. So like, we loved all the shortstops. We loved Craig Biggio being a middle infielder, Derek Jeter, Evan Longoria. Like, so he went to an auction and gave me that one day, and I was like, oh, that's cool. And then I show up, and this is my first guy that I'm facing in the big leagues, and I have an autographed picture of him. I'm like, holy crap. So I'm sitting there, and this is weird, which I honestly, like, I've talked with certain guys. My first time pitching in big league spring training was with the Tigers. first hitter I struck out, and I was perfectly fine. It wasn't until after I got the first out that I started getting nervous. Like my legs started shaking, like I started getting butterflies after the first out, which was extremely weird. Same thing happened on my big league debut. Like Longoria, I struck him out, and then the next guy was Brandon Belt, which was also kind of a crazy story because my older brother played with him kind of growing up on select ball. So I'm sitting here just like, holy crap, I got Evan Longoria, I got Brandon Belt. These guys are tenured big leaguers. Like, that's whenever my legs started shaking. I was like, oh crap, like, all right, I'm in the big leagues, like I'm pitching against big league guys. But, you know, thankfully I was able to like navigate through it and get through it. And it was that experience. Like I haven't had another experience except for when I had my save this year. That was the only other one that I felt those emotions on the field like I did on my debut.
So there is a difference then between, there is like a reality to like the closer mentality, like the 9th inning versus a 6th, 7th, 8th inning.
100%. And I mean, the situation that I came into was almost like a fantasy of how you would want to draw up your first save. Like I came in the 9th inning, there's 1 out, bases loaded. Like we're up by 2 runs, it's do or die. Like you can't afford to hit. Like you give up a hit, tie ball game, we're going to extras. So I'm sitting here just like, all right, like this is it. Like I got the blood flowing. It's like, this is what, as a reliever, this is the pinnacle right here. Like this is what you strive for as a reliever. Is you want to be that guy that comes in at the end of the game. Everybody on your bench is saying this game's locked up, we're good, and you want to be that guy that everybody has the faith in. And like thankfully I was able to come through that day, and I was like, yes, like I know that I can do that now. So it's like that, those emotions were amazing too, where it's just like you fulfilled a lifelong goal, honestly. Like even though that's one of those external goals, like one of my biggest things I wrote down as soon as I made my debut with the Mariners, my three goals with them were, and still have one, to hit 100, was to be an all-star, and then to earn a major league save. And so I was able to cross that one off the list this year, which was really cool.
Yeah, just in having worked with a number of, you know, higher leverage closers and relievers, like there is a mentality of, I want to be here. Like I've earned this. Like they don't have a chance. It's not a fear thing. It's not a, I hope I have my best stuff thing. It's a, even when they're struggling, even if they're coming off a bad outing, even when their pregame bullpen didn't necessarily go as well as they would want. Yeah. It's like they identify, or it seems to be like the most successful ones identify as a big game or a big situation pitcher. And so they've like switched their identity to like, no, I'm better under pressure. And they tell themselves that enough that they become that.
Yeah.
And they seek they actively seek the high leverage situation. They actively seek coming into the game like bases loaded, no outs. They actively seek coming in like, that's because that's how they've identified themselves, and so they want that pressure.
I mean, and that's a real thing. You look at closers that come into when they have to get their work done. They haven't closed the game in 2 or 3 games, and they have to come in. And whenever we're losing or a blowout game, they don't look as sharp. They don't look the same. They're not either throwing as hard. They're not in the zone as much as they are. There's something different versus whenever the game's on the line and they've got to close the game. There's something psychological where
they get better. They get better under the pressure.
And it's like you want to be that guy where, like I was literally talking about this with my wife the other night. Whenever we flew in, we were watching the national championship, and we were watching just the difference in the teams. And Georgia, they looked like they were prepared for the moment. TCU didn't. Like there was players that, like you could see like the first drive with TCU's quarterback, like he was overthrowing, like just didn't look like himself. Right. And then the first drive, Georgia, like they're freaking in click. Bennett's like hitting everybody, like everything was in sync. And I was like telling her, I was like, there's just something with athletes that the bigger the stage, the lights come on, the guys that are able to succeed are those ones that just like, they thrive in that moment and they love it. Like they don't try to become something that they're not. Right. Like they're able to bear down even more on who they are as a player and what they do that gets them, that makes them special. And they're able to stay within that and just freaking execute. Whereas some guys, they try to rise to the occasion and change who they are, whenever the lights get brighter or it's a bigger situation. And it's like they try to put all this other external pressure on themselves. You look at the best closers, it's like, no, like this is the moment that I was made for. Like this is this is my bread and butter. Like, I know that I'm going to come through in this situation. So
100%.
yeah, it's interesting.
Who would you say is the toughest hitter that you've had to face? Or who would you least like to face that you pitch to?
Well, I mean, as cliche as it is, Trout, like, I feel like I executed and that guy,
Right.
he took me. But honestly, no, one guy that's gotten me a couple of times and not really gotten me, just like little dink hits, is Bo Bichette. Like, both on first pitches. I think one was a slider that was executed like out of the zone, but what he does so well at is, like, his hands are so quick, so he can get to the inside pitch, but he's also, like, he bails a little bit, so he's also able to, like, keep his hands back if it is outside. So, like, I threw a first pitch slider and he, like, bailed, but he was able just to get enough bat and just hit a little bloop into right field over the second baseman. And I was like, okay, all right, now I'm going to blow him up. Next time I face him, I'm just going to go up and in.
Right.
Go up and in. He bails, but he gets his hands inside and beats the shift and shoots one to right field again. I'm like, all right, I just did opposite ends of the spectrum on this guy.
What am I supposed to do?
Yeah, like, how am I supposed to get this guy out? So I don't know. We'll see what happens next year. I mean, maybe, I don't know what I'm going to do, but he's one guy that
Gotcha.
I'm like, what the heck? But
Who's an example of a pitcher that's been in the big leagues for a while that you've actively tried to either emulate or learn from or pick their brain? Maybe someone on the Tigers, or maybe someone you just kind of idolized or studied, while you were coming up through the minor leagues.
yeah, honestly, a lot of guys, like a lot of the hard throwing guys, I try to just look at and see how they move down the mound. And, like, obviously everybody's not built different. Like, I'm not going to move like Verlander down the mound. I'm not going to move like Glass now. Like you have to take it kind of with a grain of salt. Like, I do look a lot at DeGrom, because I feel like, yeah, he's a lot taller than me, but, like, I feel like we're both similar and,
You
like,
guys have a similar first move for sure.
yeah, like, and kind of just like athleticism, like
Yeah,
movement.
both shortstops, high tempo guys.
So, like, I look a lot of, like, what he does, and, like, whenever he's on, he's one of the best pitchers in the game. So it's like, I try to just move a little bit like him, or like Bueller. And then as far as picking brains, I mean, with the guys that we have in our bullpen, we're constantly talking about, what we're doing or what we're working on, or, like, what's working for us right now, what's not. So we're doing that a lot. And then, like, I remember whenever the Astros came into town, I talked to McCullers for a little bit, and you had sent me over some videos of him with his curveball and slider, but chatted a little bit with him about that. But yeah, just mainly just kind of the guys in our bullpen or in our staff. We'll pick some brains. But there's some guys too that do that. Like Foley, one of our relievers, he's a two-seam sinker guy, can run it up like 98 up to 100. And he was talking, like, anytime that we would play somebody that had a really good two-seam, we'd go seek him out in the outfield and say, hey, like, what are you thinking about? So, like, whenever we played the Giants, he went up to Logan Webb and was like, hey, like, what are you doing with this? And he actually got a really good drill from him, which that I actually started kind of incorporating a little bit. But he would have his catcher, or whoever he was playing catch with, would turn, like he was a left-handed hitter, and would just put his glove right here. And so he would try to start his two-seam right at him, and he was working on front hipping guys. And so he told Foley that, and Foley was like, oh, like, that's good. Like, it's because I need to work on throwing my two-seam glove side. And so, like, for me, too, it's kind of hard for me to get my four-seam over there sometimes because I'm on the other side of the mound. So I randomly start doing that with some of the guys that I play catch with. I'm like, hey, will you turn your body a little bit and just put it right here, act like you're a hitter? And so for me, it's like I'm going to have that focal point of trying to start it, because I do have a little bit of run. So I'm going to start it at the right shoulder and let it come back. So I feel like that's like, you can definitely, I mean, these guys up in the big leagues, they're the 1%. Like, everybody is good, and they know something. So I think it's very smart to go try to find guys that are similar to how you move, how you throw, your metrics and everything like that, and say, hey, what do you do with this? Or what are your cues thinking about this? That's what we did yesterday with my off speed and Lang's curveball. Like, we have a similar slot, we release it the same, like the tilt is the same, but something's different in the movement. So it's like, I called him yesterday, I was like, hey, what are you doing, like, with the curveball? What are you thinking about it? And so it's good to kind of bounce ideas off of guys that you're similar with.
Do you find the level of that, or the level of, I don't know if professionalism is the right word, but, like, is there a heightened level of urgency or taking the job seriously once you make it to the big leagues versus, like, how guys kind of handle being in the bullpen and like double A, triple A, low A? Like, do you find that as you progressively get further and further up the minor league ladder and then ultimately to the big leagues, like guys are way more professional about taking their craft seriously, or do you still see that to the same extent at the lower levels?
So that's a tough one, because I've talked about that in the past with some guys, and I think you have to know who you are personally. So I went through this my senior year of high school. I knew that I wanted to go play college baseball, and that was my ultimate goal, was I was going to play after high school. So leading up to the spring, like, we're playing those, scrimmages and inter squads against other teams. Like, we're not quite really in the season yet. I was completely different. I'm a very keep it light guy. Like, I have to keep everything light, like joke around, have fun. Right. But when it comes time to work, like, I'm diligent in my work. I get my work done, but I like to have fun when I'm around the baseball field. That's just who I am. But for some reason that year, like, I was like, all right, I got to be ultra focused, and I wasn't having any fun. It was all like, I have to be just locked in at all times. And I had a good relationship with my pitcher, our manager, and like, we were family friends. He'd coached my brothers, and he came up to me and he was like, what's going on? You're not being yourself. And he even benched me. Like, I was a senior. I was supposed to be like one of our best players, our starting shortstop. I started the last 2 years, like, and he benched me for a couple games and was like, you need to figure out, like, mentally, like, who you are and what kind of player you are, because this is hurting how you play. Like, I was pressing so much. So from that moment on, I was like, this is supposed to be fun. I have to have fun when I'm doing this. And so I've carried that all the way with me today. And there are guys that are different. I know, like, I talked about it whenever I was with the Mariners. Kendall Graveman, he was a starter, and now that he's a back-end reliever guy, he still has the mentality of a starter. So he was like, yeah, every day that I show up, from the moment I get there at 12 o'clock before the game, I'm locked in, ready to go. And I'm like, dude, I can't do that. Like, that would be mentally exhausting for me. Like, I'm a guy that I keep it light, even during the game. Like, I'm out there telling jokes. Like, yeah, we're watching the game, and like, we're staying locked in. Like, if something happens, like we see a guy have an approach, like, yeah, but like in between innings or something like that, like, I'm keeping it light. And I have to do that for me. And then as soon as my name is called, switch. Like, I'm locked in, where it's weird almost. Like, it's just like, as soon as the name's called, I get on the mound, like, my hype number goes up a little bit. And then I get on the mound, I'm warming up, and then it's like, once the inning's done, boom, I even go up a couple more notches, and I'm like, I'm even more locked in. I've got my blinders on, and I'm ready to go. So I think you just kind of have to know who you are. Like, and that's another thing too that I've had to learn. And I'm not the best at it by any means. Is like, there are guys on the other end of the spectrum that have to be locked in, and so you do have to be professional, because at the end of the day, this is a job, and like, people are feeding their families off of what they're doing right here. So you don't want to do anything or be a certain way that's going to inhibit a guy getting ready for the game or getting prepared. So like, you don't want to be disrespectful in any way. You don't want to be just a clown out there. Like, there has to be a level of professionalism to it. But like, with our team and our bullpen in particular, like, we're young, and like, we're a lot of guys that have played together in the minor leagues. So like, we have a unique bond where we're able to keep it light out there, and like, we just know when it's game time for us, because the first 3 innings we're basically not doing anything, and we're just kind of sitting down there, just chopping it up with each other. But then it's like, 4th inning comes, guys start kind of moving around. 5th inning comes, then guys start looking at their pocket in the lineup, like who we're going to most likely face. They're kind of pulling up scouting reports, looking at that, and we go over that stuff before. So you should have a good idea of who you're going to be facing and what their strengths and weaknesses are. But yeah, I think there's a spectrum of guys that some guys are a little bit more quiet to themselves, they're more professional, more locked in, and there's guys that have to keep it light, and then they're able to flip a switch.
Who's the biggest jokester in the bullpen?
Probably say me. Me, I would say me or Foley. Jason Foley. And then Langer he'll let a few crack here and there, but for the most part, he's kind of laid back. But I would say, like, us 3 were always kind of just like jabbing at each other just to kind of keep it light. Because I don't know, like, I've tried it. Like I said, it's physically exhausting for me, or mentally exhausting too, where I'm just like, if I'm just sitting there just like locked in every pitch, and it's just like, you're just drained, and like, I don't know, you don't feel like loose.
No, and I've seen that even in the off season. I've seen that with guys who they're just taking everything so seriously to such an extent, and that can kind of be like my predisposition as well.
Yeah.
But to where they're always just mentally exhausted because they don't give themselves an off day. They're thinking about their baseball, their training. They're thinking about it from like the second they wake up to the second, 12 hours later, they're still thinking about it. It's like, you need something else. Like 3-4 hours a day, like you're gonna get your work in.
Yeah.
Something else to put your mind on the rest of the day.
And it's easy to do that. Like I feel bad for my wife. Like she gets on to me a lot too, because like there's times in the off season where I start to dive in like on video and I'm looking, like I'm taking videos of my throwing, and then I go home and I'm analyzing it. But it gets even worse in the off season. I mean, during the season, she'd have to get on to me all the time because like we FaceTime every night before we go to bed. And there'd be times where like I would just kind of have a blank face, and we'd be FaceTiming on the iPad, and she's like, "You're looking at video right now, aren't you?"
Yeah.
And I'm like, "Yes." She's like, "Can you just put it up? Like, look at it whenever you're at the field tomorrow." So I definitely think you have to have that balance, because it's almost like the data thing. Like if you're diving into the numbers too much, it's going to be detrimental. It's the same thing about this. Like if you're too serious and like every little thing, it's almost, I feel like it goes hand in hand with like superstitions, where it's like if you're locked in and something goes wrong throughout the day that you can't control, or if you're just constantly thinking about it, you're not going to be able to adapt if something changes. Like if there's a rain delay, or if they called down to get somebody hot and they're getting hot, and then they put a pitch hitter in and they're like, "Hey, you got one guy to get hot," and they call down for you, and you got to be able to get ready like that. So if you're a guy that has to be locked in at all times, they call down for the other guy, and you're like, "All right, I can relax a little bit." Then 30 seconds later, the phone rings again. And it's like, "Oh no, never mind, it's you."
Yeah. Especially as a reliever. I mean, starters have a little bit more predictability.
Yeah.
Even then, like rain delays, like they'll start getting pushed forward to bat. Like that can happen, but as a reliever, like you never know if you're going to throw that day.
Exactly, and there's just so many variables that go into it. So it's like you have to be able to like almost be like water, where it's just you're fluid with it. Like it's just whatever happens. You can't control it. It's just like, all right, cool. Like you have to have that mentality. And I honestly think that's a difference in mentalities between relievers and starters. Like starters, I feel like kind of on our team too. It's like they're more of the focused, professional,
routine oriented.
Yeah, very routine oriented. And it's like you almost look at the relievers and it's like, oh, those guys are a bunch of clowns. It's like, it's not. Like we get in, we get our work done. Like every day we're in there, we're in the weight rooms, we're one of the hardest workers out there, but we're able to keep it light because we have to, So I don't know. Like that was something I learned in college too. We had our Friday night guy. I had no clue about pitchers. Like I was like, pitchers are weird. Like I'm going to stay away from them. But it was whenever I had made the transition to pitching, he had a very strict routine on his start days. He would run, I think, like 3 pulls to start, and he would set his glove in a particular spot, and it had to be in a particular position. So like I walked up and grabbed his glove and was like kind of messing with it while he was running, and he gets like down the line and starts cussing me out from 30 yards away, like, "Vest, put my effing glove down. It's freaking start day. Don't mess with me doing all this." And I'm like, dude, take it easy. Like you got an hour before you're like supposed to be starting. Like you're way too serious right now. And it's just like, I feel like the guys that are like that, the littlest things can kind of set them out of whack for the rest of the day, where it's like if you're more, go with the flow or adaptable, then I feel like you're able to react to some of those things 100%. A little bit better.
So last question for you. I like to end on this one, but like what would your biggest advice be for young players? Anyone watching this, anyone in your shoes when you were 15 years old, 16 years old, 17 years old, setting that goal of playing professionally, setting that goal of playing in the big leagues, like what's your advice to young players?
As cliche as it is, but I mean it really is my bread and butter of my story, of everything that I've gone through, is most likely you're not gonna be the dude. There's only a finite number of the guys that are destined to be, the big leaguers, like the Bryce Harpers, the Trouts, like the guys that are just strictly better than everybody else. So you have to outwork everyone. And that's what that was always my mentality, was I may not be the most physically gifted, but I'm going to beat you in some realm. And it's going to be how I prepare and how I work. And that was instilled in me when I was in middle school, because I was always the smallest guy. I was the runt, like in everything that I was 5'2" as a sophomore in high school. Like I was tiny. I weighed like 130 pounds. But I'll never forget my freshman year. I was trying out for the baseball team, and we were running 60-yard dashes, and they paired me up with a fat kid who, like, I don't even know if he made the team. He beat me. I ran an 8.2 as a freshman, and I'm a shortstop. Like, I'm supposed to be like an athletic kid. So I literally ran the slowest time of everybody as a freshman. I come home and I'm like crying. Like I was crying a little bit, and I was like, my dad's like, what's going on? And I was like, I'm not gonna make the team. Like, I'm undersized, I'm not strong. Like, I was the slowest guy out there. And he sat me down, and I think this is literally what changed like the trajectory of my career. Was this conversation was, you got two options. One, you can let this defeat you, or you can find a way to beat it. And that's when I was like, all right, sounds good. So literally we were in between moving houses at the time. So we were living in an apartment. So every night that I'd get home, in our parking lot, I was just running wind sprints every single night, just going back and forth. And so then you fast forward to summer ball, I go and try out for a select team, I got cut. And the reason that I got cut was undersized, not strong enough, you're not developed.
Right.
I was like, well, I can't like really worry about that. Like, I don't control like my puberty. I don't control my development. But I was like, okay. So what I do all that summer was work out, run, try to get stronger and faster. Fast forward to the next year in the summer ball, I got cut again. You're not big enough, you're not strong enough. What did I do all summer? Worked out, try to get bigger, try to get stronger. And then finally, like my junior year, nature finally came, and like I grew 8 inches, but like I had that base of getting in the weight room and like doing all that. I didn't really get that much stronger because my body hadn't developed yet.
Right.
But what I did do, and what was really important for me at that time that I didn't realize, was I created a work ethic where it's like, that's what worked for me. Like, even though like that was almost my outlet, it's like I had to get in there and like almost get my demons out, where it's like, you know, screw those guys, I'm going to prove them wrong, but I'm going to go in here and I'm going to work. But I didn't like get super strong. I wasn't able to, you know, go bench 225. I wasn't able to go squat 315. Like I couldn't squat 315 until I was like a freshman in college. But it was the work ethic that I got in there and got. And like that's still with me today, is where, you know, I'll go back to my wife, like she'll get a little annoyed where it's like I'll go spend 3 hours at the gym like on a lighter day. She's like, what do you have today? And I'm like, oh, it's like a lighter day, like I'm just gonna throw and, you know, roll out a little bit, do some movement stuff. And she's calling me 3 hours later, she's like, I thought it was a lighter day. And I was like, yeah, I kind of got it down a rabbit hole. Like I'm doing some of this, and it's like you fall in love with the work. It's like you enjoy it, you love the process, because you know at the end you're gonna get rewarded after putting in all that work. So I know that was very long-winded, but I just think the best advice right now, if you're 14, 15, 16, is learn how to work hard. Like it's almost like the generations now is that instant gratification, right? You get anything you want on the phone right there. It's like we've lost touch with getting into a program and trying to train a year before you're really seeing results, or like just hammering in day after day, day after day. And it's like, you might see just the smallest result, but it's like, yes, that's what I was after. Now let's see how much better I can get. You have to fall in love with that process. And I think that's the best advice that's going to propel you throughout your career.
Awesome, Will. Well, appreciate you coming on and having this conversation. And again, we wish you the best of luck this coming season.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Man. Yeah, appreciate it.